All right, so chapter 5 of The Knight in the Rusty Armor. Let's go. So the knight, Squirrel, and Rebecca started out once more on the path of truth, this time toward the castle of knowledge. They stopped only twice that day, once to eat, and the second time by a brook, so that the knight could shave off his scraggly beard and cut his hair, which had grown very long. He did this by sharpening one side of his gauntlet on a rock and using the edge to cut. He felt and looked much better. With the helmet gone, he could eat nuts without Squirrel's help. Though he appreciated the little animal's life saving technique, he really didn't consider it gracious living. Just before nightfall, the trio trudged over a hill and beheld in the distance the castle of knowledge. The knight stared at the impressive structure. It was larger than the castle of silence, and its door was of solid gold. This was the largest castle he had ever seen, even larger than the grand castle the king had built for himself. The knight wondered who had designed it. Sam suddenly spoke. The castle of knowledge was designed by the universe itself, the source of all knowledge. The knight was startled, but happy to hear from Sam again. I'm glad you're back, he said. I never left, Sam replied. Remember, I'm you. Please, I don't want to go through that again. How do you like me now that I've had a shave and a haircut? The knight asked. It's the first time you ever profited from being clipped, Sam replied. The knight laughed. He liked Sam's sense of humor. If the Castle of Knowledge was going to be anything like the Castle of Silence, he would be glad to have Sam keep him company. The knight, Squirrel, and Rebecca crossed the drawbridge over the moat and stopped before the golden door, where the knight took the key from around his neck and turned it in the lock. As he pushed the door open, he asked Rebecca and Squirrel if they were going to leave again, as they did at the Castle of Silence. No, Rebecca replied. Silence is for one, knowledge is for all. I wonder how the word pigeon came to mean an easy mark, thought the knight to himself. The three of them walked through the door and into a darkness so dense the knight could scarcely see beyond his hand. He looked for the customary torches by the castle door to light the way. There weren't any. Judging from the door of gold, he expected a well-lit castle. After all, even cheap tract castles had torches by the front door. As the knight peered about, Squirrel called him to join her. He felt his way toward the direction of her voice until he could discern that she was pointing in the dim light to an inscription that glowed on the wall. It read, Knowledge is the light by which you shall find your way. The knight reflected that whoever ran this castle had a clever way of cutting down on the light bills. Then Sam said, It means that the more you know, the lighter it will get in here. Sam, I'll wager you're right, exclaimed the knight. And the moment he said this, the room became a wee bit brighter. Just then, Squirrel called again for the knight to join her. This time she was easier to find, and he saw that she was pointing to another inscription chiseled into the wall. This one was a question. It read, Have you mistaken need for love? The knight said aloud, Do I have to figure out the answer before I get more light in this castle? You're catching on, replied Sam. The knight snorted. I have to find any way through this castle so I can reach the top of the mountain. I don't have time to play 20 questions. Maybe you're supposed to learn here that you have all the time in the world, suggested Rebecca. The knight was not in a receptive mood and did not wish to listen to her philosophy. For a moment, he considered plunging into the darkness of the castle and blundering through. The blackness, however, was quite forbidding, and he had to admit that without his sword he was afraid. It seemed to him he had no other choice but to learn what the inscription meant. He sighed and sat down before it. He read it again. Have you mistaken need for love? Well, he knew that he loved Juliet and Christopher. Sam said, Yes, you loved Juliet and Christopher, but didn't you need them too? I suppose so, admitted the knight. He needed all the beauty Juliet added to this life. She was very smart, wrote lovely poetry, and said witty things. She even cooked for him and his friends when they couldn't afford serving maids. He remembered that she sewed attractive clothing for herself and Christopher when the night business was slow and he couldn't afford to buy new clothes. Juliet also kept a very clean castle. The knight reflected that he gave her a lot of castles to clean. Often he came home broke after a crusade and they would move into a cheaper one. He realized he left her to do most of the moving by herself, as he was usually off at some tournament. He recalled how weary she appeared when she moved their belongings from castle to castle. As he became aware of how he used Juliet, the tears began flowing down his face. Yes, he needed her more than he loved her. He wished he could have loved her more and needed her less, but he didn't know how. He continued to cry. He needed Christopher, too, more than he loved him. A knight needed a son to go out and do battle in his father's name when the father grew old. This did not mean that he didn't love Christopher. Indeed, he loved his son's wit and golden-haired beauty, and he liked to hear him say, "I love you, Dad." But as he loved these things about Christopher, he also needed them. A thought came to the knight in a blinding flash. He needed the love of Juliet and Christopher because he did not love himself. In fact, he needed the love of all those princesses he rescued from dragons and all those people for whom he fought on crusades. He didn't love himself because he didn't love himself. It was a stunning realization. He saw that if he didn't love himself, he couldn't really love others. Suddenly, a beautiful bright light shone around the knight, illuminating the darkness. He felt a gentle hand on his shoulder, and looking up through his tears, he saw Merlin smiling down at him. "You've just discovered a great truth," said the magician. "You can love others only to the extent that you love yourself." "How do I start loving myself?" asked the knight. "You already have. Knowledge is the path to love." "I know that I'm a good for nothing," sobbed the knight. "There's no need to feel sorry for yourself," said Merlin in a kindly tone. "Now you know the truth." This comforted the knight, and he stopped crying. As his eyes dried, he saw the light that filled the room. It was unlike any light he had ever seen. It seemed to come from nowhere, yet everywhere. Merlin echoed the knight's thought. There's nothing more beautiful than the light of self-knowledge. The knight looked at the light around him, then into the gloom ahead. "There is no darkness in this castle for you, is there?" he asked Merlin. "No," replied Merlin, "not anymore." Thus encouraged, the knight got to his feet, ready to go on. He thanked Merlin for showing up when he hadn't called him. "That's all right," said the magician. "This one's on me." So saying, he vanished. The knight moved on, and Rebecca came flying out of the darkness ahead. "Wow," she exclaimed, "do I have something to show you?" The knight had never seen Rebecca so excited. She was usually pretty cool, but now she hopped up and down on his shoulder, scarcely able to contain herself, as she guided him and squirrel into the darkness. Suddenly, they came upon a large mirror on the wall. That's it," she chirped loudly. Her eyes glowed with enthusiasm. The knight, however, was disappointed. "It's only a crummy old mirror," he said impatiently. "Come on, let's get going." "It's not an ordinary mirror," insisted Rebecca. "It doesn't show who you think you are. It shows who you really are." This got the knight's attention, but he was not enthusiastic. He didn't care much for mirrors. He had never considered himself very handsome. So with some reluctance, he stood now before this mirror. He expected to see a tall man with sad eyes and a large nose, covered with armor up to his neck. Instead, to his amazement, he saw a charming, vital man whose eyes shone with compassion and love. "Who's that?" he exclaimed. Squirrel said, "It's you, the real you." "That mirror's a phony," said the knight. "I don't look like that." "You are seeing the real you, the you who lives beneath your armor," replied Sam. "But protested the knight, looking deeper into the mirror. That man is a magnificent specimen, and that look on his face, it's beautiful and innocent. That is your potential, said Sam. If that's my potential, said the knight, something awful has happened on my way to making it real. Yes, said Sam. You put a shield between yourself and your real feelings. Maybe I did hide my feelings, said the knight, but I couldn't go around just saying everything I felt like saying and doing everything I felt like doing. Nobody would have liked me. The knight stopped short as he uttered these words, realizing that he had lived his whole life in a way that he had hoped would make people like him. He thought of all the crusades he fought, the dragons he slew, and the princesses he rescued to prove that he was good, kind, and loving. But the truth was that he didn't have to prove anything. He was good, kind, and loving. Jumping javelins, he explained. I've wasted my whole life. No, Sam said quickly. It hasn't been a waste. You've needed time to learn what you just learned. I still feel like crying, said the knight. Now that would be a waste, said Sam, and he sang. Tears of self-pity end up in disgust. They're not the kind that cause armor to rust. The knight had heard enough of Sam's humor. Stop with the rotten rhymes or I'll kick you out. You can't, chortled Sam. I'm you. And that moment, in order to get rid of Sam, the knight would have gladly shot himself. But luckily, guns had not been invented yet. There was really no way to get around Sam, and as he looked into the mirror once more, he saw kindness, love, compassion, intelligence, unselfishness looking back at him. He realized that if he wanted to manifest these qualities, he had only to claim them, for they were his all along. At this thought, the beautiful light shone once more, brighter than before, illuminating the whole room and revealing to the knight's surprise that the castle had only one gigantic room instead of many. Sam said, that's the standard building code for a castle of knowledge. Real knowledge isn't divided into compartments because it all stems from one truth. The knight nodded in agreement. He was ready to leave this castle as Squirrel came running up to him and said, the castle has a courtyard with a big apple tree growing in the center of it. Oh, take me to it, exclaimed the knight, for he was getting quite hungry. So he and Rebecca followed Squirrel into the courtyard, where he saw a large apple tree. Its sturdy boughs bent under the weight of the reddest, shiniest apples he had ever seen. How do you like them apples? Quipped Sam. The knight chuckled. Then he noticed an inscription chiseled on the slab of stone beneath the tree. For this fruit, I impose no condition, but that you learn about ambition. The knight puzzled over this, as he had no idea what it meant. Finally, he decided to forget it. If you do, you'll never get out of here, said Sam. Weary from the strain of being repeatedly challenged and tested, the knight groaned. Then with a sigh, he picked an apple and sat down under the tree with Rebecca and Squirrel. Do you know what this inscription means? He asked them. Squirrel shook her head. Even Rebecca, clever as she was, had to shake her head. But I do know, said Rebecca, scratching her head thoughtfully with one claw, that I don't have any ambition. Neither do I, chimed in Squirrel, and I'll bet this tree doesn't have any either. She's onto something, said Rebecca. This tree is like us. It doesn't have any ambition. Maybe you don't need ambition. That's all right for trees and animals, said the knight, but a human being must have ambition. You're both right, said a voice from behind them. Startled, the knight turned and saw that Merlin had appeared again. The magician was carrying a lute. I was about to call you, said the knight. I know, he replied. Everyone needs help to understand a tree. A tree is content just being a tree, the same as Rebecca and Squirrel are happy just being what they are. But human beings are different. They have minds, protested the knight. Yeah, humans have minds, said Merlin, idly plucking a few notes on his lute. That's the problem with ambition. When it comes from the mind, a person relentlessly moves forward to achieve his goal. In so doing, he often hurts others. And that's how ambition becomes competition. Well, admitted the knight, I have always wanted to be the best knight in the kingdom. Exactly, said Merlin, which led you to prove you were better than other knights. The knight nodded. But you said that humans needed ambition. Yes, if it comes from the heart. Ambition that comes from the heart is pure and harms no one. In fact, it serves oneself in such a way that it automatically serves others. I don't get it, said the knight. Here's where we can learn from this apple tree. It has become a handsome, fully mature tree bearing fine fruit, and it gives freely of the fruit to anyone who wishes to take it. But, objected the knight, if I sat around all day giving away free apples, I couldn't own a classy castle and be able to trade in last year's horse for a new one. True, said Merlin, because humans like to acquire material possessions, but it is necessary to separate need from greed. You could sell some of your apples to have your classy castle, and you could give away those apples that you didn't need so that others could be nourished. The more the apples are picked, the more the tree grows. The more it grows, the more beautiful it becomes. And that's how it can be with a man when he understands ambition from the heart. But it's easier for trees than it is for people in this world, said the knight. It's all a matter of how you perceive it, said Merlin. You receive the same life energy as the tree. You use the same water, air, and nourishment from the earth. But your ambition comes only from your mind, and in your mind, you are never satisfied with being. You always want to become. So you can't relax and enjoy your real being because you're too busy trying to become. Go tell that to a wife who wants to trade in last year's horse, retorted the knight. A hint of amusement flickered across Merlin's face. I assure you that if you learn from the tree, you will soon have all the horses and castles you want without hurting anyone in the process. The knight was astounded. You mean that I could get everything I need just by being rooted, by staying in my own backyard? Merlin laughed. Human beings were given 2 feet so they wouldn't have to stay in one place, but if they would stand still more often and accept instead of running around to grab, they would then truly understand ambition from the heart. The knight sat, affected deeply by these thoughts. He studied the apple tree flourishing before him. Then he looked at Squirrel, Rebecca, and Merlin. Neither the tree nor the animals had ambition, and Merlin's ambition was obviously from his heart. They all looked happy and well nourished. All were beautiful specimens of life. He then looked at himself, scrawny with a scraggly beard. He was undernourished, nervous, and exhausted from lugging around his heavy armor. All this he had acquired by ambition from the mind, and all this he now knew he must change. This idea of changing was a bit frightening, but then again, he wasn't really living, he was dying. So what did he have to lose? From this moment on, I will accept what I'm given, he pledged. As the knight spoke these words, the castle and Merlin both vanished, and he found himself with Rebecca and Squirrel back on the path of truth. To one side of the path was a sparkling clear brook. Thirsty, he knelt over it to drink and noticed with some surprise that the armor on his arms and legs had rusted and fallen off, and also that his beard was once more very long. The knight was dumbfounded. Like the castle of silence, the castle of knowledge had played tricks with him. So that's why time moves so swiftly, he thought. It moves slowly only when one has to depend on others to fill it. Now he was learning how to depend only upon himself. With all his armor gone, except for the chest plate, he felt lighter and younger than he had in years. He liked himself better than he had in years, too. So with the firm step of a young man, he started for the castle of will and daring, with Rebecca flying above and Squirrel scrambling at his heels. Stay tuned for the very last chapter 6. See you soon.